All right, here we go again with another Appalachian Mountain supernatural witch story. Again, these aren't stories, these are firsthand encounters. This is the last one that I have for you guys. He only had two stories that he would tell over the years. And like I said, I would hear these tales and stories my whole life, and I was always so intrigued by them. If you haven't listened to that first one, it's called Appalachian Mountain Supernatural Witch Encounter. Go ahead and listen to that one first because he references some things in this story from the story that he told first. All right, again, I hope you guys enjoy it.
The other story I had, the experience I had personally or whatever, is as we were kids growing up on Bull Creek. There was a lady that lived over at Guess's Fork on the Virginia side, Buchanan County, Virginia. Now, my mom is actually from Guess's Fork, so she had relatives over there and she knew a lot of people. Dad from across the mountain on the West Virginia side, a little place called Bull Creek. But anyway, they went to church a lot over on the Virginia side. And there was a lady that went to the church also, and her name was Roxy, Roxy Runyon. Now, Roxy, I'm still using the real name because Roxy has been passed for a lot of years. So everybody around, I hear a cat meow, but
back there screaming.
everybody around or whatever claimed that Roxy was a witch. Now, Roxy had a huge goiter under her chin that was as large as a grapefruit.
I remember when you told me this when I was young, I didn't know what a goiter was.
But anyway, you know now.
Yeah.
But anyway, she had this huge goiter, so she looked really weird to start with. A long pointed nose. I mean, she just looked the part of a witch, okay? But anyway, so nobody would have anything to do with Roxy. Even though she's come to church, nobody associated with anything with Roxy. Nobody had anything to talk to her about. But Dad and Mom, they felt sorry for her and befriended Roxy. And one Sunday or whatever, they asked Roxy, if they come and got her at a certain date, if she wanted to come back and spend the next weekend with them. She said, yeah, that would be good. She would like that. She hadn't done that in a long time with anybody. So Mom and Dad goes and gets Roxy. Now, all of us kids knew of Roxy and had seen Roxy, but we had never conversed with Roxy. We never talked to her. Kind of stayed away from her. But anyway, she comes over and spends the night. And during this time, it was close to the 4th of July because at that time, most people in southern West Virginia did not go to the store and buy flowers. In fact, I don't know that my mom ever bought a flower for decoration in my entire life, or her entire life. They were made out of crepe paper. They'd take crepe paper and they would use a spoon, fork, knife, or whatever and make different designs. So you haven't seen a flower in the store that they could not make. They could make any kind of a flower that they wanted to make. But anyway, while Roxy was there, they were making a few flowers. But anyway, they would do this after dinner and later in the night. So we're having dinner one day, and everybody's at the table eating. My younger sister, Glenna, had invited a friend down that lived up on the hill just a little ways from us, maybe 75, 80 yards from us or whatever. And we had just got through eating dinner. The rest of us went outside, left Glenna and her friend Carol. They were both young at that time, probably 10, maybe 10 or 11 years of age, 9 or 10. But anyway, the rest of us all outside. Then all of a sudden, we hear the awfulest screaming you ever heard in your life. Dad's sitting on the outside also, so he jumps up and runs inside to the kitchen where Glenna and Carol are. And he runs over to both of them and said, now he's a thinking they have been burned. They've got themselves burned some way because at that time we did not have hot water heater or anything. The stove was a cook stove. It was a wood stove or whatever, where you put wood in there to cook off the stove. And he's thinking just maybe they got into this stove and got burned. And he asked Glenn, he said, where you burned at? Where you burned? She said, Dad, we're not burned. He said, what's the matter? What's the problem? She said, it's Roxy. Well, Dad said, well, I didn't think about it. But said, when I ran into the kitchen, said Roxy was standing there and she wheeled around with her back and said, I could see from the side, said she, like she was rolling twine up on a ball. Just really fast, as fast as she could roll this upon a ball. Whatever. And he says, I still didn't pay attention to that or think anything about that. But Roxy's in the kitchen with Glenn and Carol. And Daddy said, you're not burned. Said, what's the problem? I said, well, what is it, honey? What is it? And she said, it's Roxy. He said, what do you mean it's Roxy? She said, and Roxy's still standing over and she's still doing this, whatever it is, rolling that string up in a ball or something. And she says, Roxy came in here and started saying something to him. We don't know what she's saying. And we just looked around and she said, fire was coming out of Roxy's eyes. Literally, fire was coming out of her eyes. And she said, that scared us, Daddy. Well, Roxy, in the meantime, turns and walks out. Roxy asked the kids what's wrong. You know, did I startle you or something like that?
Right.
She's getting out of the kitchen. She's getting away from there now. And she goes back in the living room.
But she knows what she did.
Yeah, she knows what she did. Anyway, Dad's thinking, well, the kids just got scared, okay? He's thinking they just got scared. There's nothing to this. They just got scared. So he tells Glenna to go ahead and take Carol home. Well, Carol, like I said, they lived about 60 or 70 yards there from the house. Glenna takes Carol up, but Glenna don't come home. She ain't coming home. She ain't coming back till Roxy's gone. That night it got dark. Mama got Arizona, her sister, who lived up on the hill a little bit from us, probably another 40 yards, 50 yards from us, to help her make these flowers. Now, they're afraid to go to bed. They're going to sit up all night and make flowers. And tomorrow they're going to take Roxy home or whatever. But tonight they're going to sit up all night. But anyway, Dad's on the outside, and we had a big living room in the house. Mom and Arizona sitting in, if you're standing from the outside looking in, they're in the left-hand corner of the room. And we had like a sectional couch or whatever that made a semicircle. They're sitting there making flowers. Roxy's off to almost the center of this window looking in. Mom and Arizona off to the left, but Roxy's sitting there or whatever, and Dad's on the outside. And he said, I'm thinking about what these kids said. Then he says, I got the other kids, they're going through the house, whatever, going through the house, back and forth through the house and into the bedroom or to the bathroom or whatever. And he says, Roxy's sitting there and not saying anything to nobody. Roxy hasn't said anything the whole time after this happened, but she's sitting there. And he says every time a kid would go by, said she'd focus her eyes on that kid. And said she would raise up almost plumb out of the seat as she go by, you know, and she was just like she's desperately trying to get their attention, trying to make eye contact with them. And the kids weren't paying any attention to Roxy. And he says, I looked at that and I saw that. And he says, I'm thinking that's strange. When the kids come back, she would get in that almost standing in position or whatever, raise up and trying her best, you know, focus her eyes on the kids and get those kids or somebody to look at her, to get the attention. For some reason, she wanted eye contact. And he says, I sat there and watched that for 15 or 20 minutes. And he said, now what I'm watching is beginning to scare me. And he says, nothing ever scares me, but this is beginning to scare me. She's really trying to do something to these kids, and I don't know what she's trying to do. And I'm not sure what she was trying to do to Carol and Glenna, my sister. He said, but she definitely was trying to do something to them after I'm watching her, what she's trying to do right now. I said, she's trying to make eye contact with the kids as they go through back and forth through the house. But none of them aren't paying attention to Roxy. He said, I thought about this. There's your mom in Arizona going to sit up all night, make flowers, because they're afraid to go to bed too. But he goes in, I tell him, I said, Icy, go ahead and let Arizona go on home, her sister, on the hill. Put the kids to bed. Put Roxy to bed. And she said, how come? He said, just do what I say. So They put us in bed. Give Roxy a bedroom to herself. Now, we didn't have any doors that separated the bedrooms or anything. All we had was like a rod over top of the door with a sheet, that went across the door.
Yeah.
And to go in, you just pull the sheet back. So he got Roxy's, and she went to bed here. Me and Kermit Windows here, and Mom and Dad and Patsy's in this other room, and Glenna, the room that Glenna and Patsy slept in. Roxy's got that bed. But anyway, after everything settled down, I told you we cooked in an old cook stove that had to use wood. So he went in and got a stick of stove wood, which is about 12, 14 inches long, and about as round as your if you're a skinny guy, about as round as my wrist as far as the wood was concerned. And went in and propped himself up in the door facing. Put his feet against the door, part of the door here, and he puts his back against this. Now, he says, if Roxy tries to come out there and get to them kids tonight, he says, I'm going to beat her to death with this stick of wood. He said, I don't mind telling you, I'm scared. He said, I don't know what she's going to do or what she can do. But he says, I'm scared right now. But if she comes out of that bed and tries to come in one of these rooms, I'm going to beat her to death with this stick of wood right here. All thing's going to save Roxy tonight is she stays in that bed. If she comes out of there, she's had it. Well, fortunately for him and Roxy both, Roxy does not attempt to come out of that bedroom. Morning comes, Dad's still sitting there, but anyway, he gets up and get the kids up and everybody get ready. It's Sunday morning. So he's taking Roxy back home. And does take Roxy back home. No other incident happened. Now, about a month later, he's talking, well, no, I was supposed probably a couple of years go by, maybe 4 or 5 years go by. And he's telling me about a month goes by or whatever. And he said, I'm picking up nerve to go ask her, what was she trying to do to these kids? Tell me what you was trying to do. Tell me what you were trying to accomplish or what you were doing. But then I was telling somebody, I'm going down to talk to her about that. And they told me, Ed, do not do that. Because he said, listen, he said, you may get into something that you can't get out of. He said, you may learn something you ain't supposed to learn, and there ain't no getting out of it after you learn it. He said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I'd stay away from that. He said, so I never did go and talk to her about it. But he said, I really, later in life, kind of wish I had went and just try to find out, just exactly what she was trying to do to the kids, why she was trying to do that to the kids. He said, I don't know, she was an old woman, and he said, I get thinking that maybe she was trying to pass on what ability she had to being a witch, maybe trying to pass that on to somebody else or whatever. I don't know. He said, I don't know to this day. The other incident is related to Roxy. This same guy was from Guess's Fork or whatever. They ended up marrying my grandmother. This would be my grandmother's second husband. And his name was Old Man, we called him Old Man Works. I was just a kid at the time. But anyway, Old Man Works was in the hospital. Dad went to see him. Old Man Works is dying, literally dying. And Dad said, I went to visit him because he said, I didn't figure he was going to come out of that hospital. And said, listen, he said, looked like the roof of his mouth just fell down into his mouth. And him trying to talk, laying there, looked like he's dying. Dad said, I'm talking to him or whatever, and he's trying to talk and he can't talk. He said, I come back and tell your mom that he'll be dead in the morning. He won't live tonight. So he says a couple of days later, he says, I still ain't heard word that he died or anything. Nobody told me anything. And he says, I'm driving down Guess's Fork about 2 or 3 days later, and here goes somebody walking down Guess's Fork. Now, Old Man Works never owned an automobile. And most people at that time did not have an automobile. They walked where they went or rode a horse where they wanted to go. And he says, I'm looking. He said, that looks like Old Man Works, which would be Dad's father-in-law now. So he said, I got closer, and I'm slowing down, And I kind of looked, and it is him. I said, I drive kind of by him and looking at him, and it is him. And I stopped, and he came up and got the truck. And he said, he called him by his first name, and I don't know what his first name was. But anyway, he said, listen, he said, last time I saw you, you was in bad shape. He said, I didn't think you was coming out of the hospital. He said, well, it's back to get. He said, they want me to say some things I wouldn't say. Dad said, what? He said, I can't tell you. But he says, I was dying. He said, I was literally dying. But he says, if I didn't say it, I was going to die, and I knew it. And he said, I finally said the stuff they wanted me to say and do, promised to do the stuff they wanted me to do. But they were going to kill me. And he said, who are you talking about? He said, other warlocks. Now, when he said other warlocks, that meant he was a warlock, okay? But my grandmother never, ever mentioned that. Before, after, during, or anything else. She had never mentioned that. But that's the only time he ever said anything to Dad about that. He didn't live. He didn't live a year after that. So I don't know if it had anything to do with what he was talking about, or maybe something else come along. I'm not sure. But I will tell you, John, there are strange things out there that we do not understand.
I agree.
Now, the Bible talks about witches, okay? I mean, that's for a fact.
Yeah.
They were there during Jesus' time, and they're still here to this day. We just don't see them or whatever, but they're there now.
I believe it.
So,
for sure.
This is about 20 years ago. John Rife, John has passed away also, his son Bernard. About the time we moved the mobile home cells, about the time we moved the mobile home cells on top of the hill or whatever, John and Dad got to be pretty good friends. And John was telling, that him and his brother, and named off a couple of others, would do seances. And he says, now we can make a table walk. He said, we could put our hand on the table. And he said he'd have so much pressure on it or whatever, wanted to pull up. And he said, we'll stand up there, whatever, putting our hand and pushing down on it. He said, we've actually broke a table in two before, trying to hold it down. And it's coming up off the ground. So there are forces out there. And if you ever decide, hey, I'm going to find out what this is, it may be like kind of getting into a cult and can't get yourself back out of it again. So Dad would never, John invited him, come and join, come be with us or whatever. But he refused. He would not go. And I don't blame him, because he told me, he says, I'm afraid if I get into that stuff or whatever, then I'm going to be in a position where I can't get back out of it. It's kind of like old man Warks or whatever. He sounded like he wanted something he wanted to get out of, but a year later he's dead. And he's in a hospital, and Dad said, I'm looking for him to tell us tomorrow. He died because he said looked like the roof of his mouth. He says, while we were driving down Gases Fork after I picked him up, I said, open your mouth up, let me look in your mouth. He said, he opened his mouth up, and I looked in, and he said, it looked okay. But he says, I'm telling you, while he's laying in the hospital, it looked like the roof of his mouth was just laying down in his mouth, or what, just laying there. He said, it looked like the roof of his mouth had come down. But he said, I asked him, open your mouth up, let me look inside your mouth. So there are things out there that we do not understand. There are things out there that we really don't want to get involved too deeply in either. Because I'm thinking, if you do, then there's no path back out. You don't get to come back out. Once you enter that dominion or whatever domain, you don't get to come back out there. So there's strange things out there.
Well, Ed, I really appreciate you telling these stories.
Well,
That way I can
listen,
get them on recording.
those stories or whatever. Now, let me just add a tat to Gid, okay?
You go ahead.
Dad's got cancer. This is 1995. Now, this incident happened probably in 65. So 30 years later. So Dad's dying of cancer. And I said, Dad, you remember that story of Gid Bailey you told me that happened or whatever? About his wife jumping out of that, coming out of that, floating out of that window, down to the garden, picking his stuff up, back up through that window. I said, are you still sticking to that story? Now here he is, he's dying. He said, listen, I had no reason to lie to you then, and I've got no reason to lie to you now. What I told you then is exactly what happened and the way it happened. So here's a guy dying on his deathbed telling me that happened now. I didn't have no reason to lie to you then. I got no reason to lie to you now. What I told you 30 years ago happened, and it happened just exactly the way I told you it happened. Chester Roberts never come back to that temple. Dad never went back to that temple. It scared Dad to death, and Chester both.
I think it would have me too.
I mean, you see something like that, you know that.
It's not supposed to happen, right?
No, I mean that's you're defying gravity. Along, you know, here you are floating. This house is up on the hill, and to float down to the railroad track, you got to float 90 feet to 100 feet or whatever to get down to that garden. It's almost straight down. She floats down out of that window. He said we don't know what she picked out of the garden. I'm sitting there watching her. Chester's watching, then she goes back through that window. Chester, I'm looking at Chester, and he's looking at me, and he said, we don't say nothing to each other. We just jumped up and run. We both run to our vehicles, and we drove out. We neither one of them been back there.
Oh, that's good.
So you just never know, John, what's out there. You think you got the world figured out, then all of a sudden something comes along and throws you a loop. You have no idea what's happened. That's what I said before. There's stuff out there we do not understand. There's stuff out there that we don't want to understand. There's stuff out there we don't want to get involved with. Some of this stuff that you've seen or whatever that other people don't see. Listen, you just got a glimpse of some stuff out there that's out there that me and the rest of the world ain't seen yet.
Yeah.
Some people might have seen it.
Yeah.
But anyway, you were fortunate enough to get a glimpse and know that there's other things out there besides me sitting here looking at you and you sitting here looking at me.
Oh, for sure.
So it's scary. I mean, it's really scary. That's why you have to lock on to Jesus.
Yes.
And hold on to him, John. You got to hold on to him with everything you got because, listen, you know, and I know, the devil's using everything he's got to take your soul.
To do it.
He's wanting your soul. So I hope, you know, the grandkids will hear this way down the road or whatever, listen to this, and Ed will probably be gone to the happy hunting ground. And they get a little bit of enjoyment out of that.
Oh, I know they will. I always did. All the years I always did. And it always is like the first time. When you tell it, it's always like the first time I'm hearing it. I always love it. I love you, buddy. Thank you.
Well, I love you too. God bless.